Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. Headline number one. The Arizona Senate voted this week to pass the Secure the Border Act. Pass it on to voters, that is, for our consideration on this fall's ballot. If it passes the state house and voters give it the thumbs up, the law would make entering Arizona illegally from another country a state crime. Headline number two. A Noble Predictive Insights poll shows that in the Arizona U.S. Senate race, Democrat Ruben Gallego has a 10-point lead over Kari Lake in the presumptive fall matchup. Democrats are more united around Gallego than Republicans are around Lake, but there's not enough of a crack in Lake's Republican armor to give Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb much hope in the Republican primary. And headline number three, in Arizona's presidential race, the same poll shows Donald Trump continues to hold a lead with a 3-point advantage over Joe Biden. But that's not because Trump's gained support. It's because Biden's lost more support than Trump. When Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is put into the mix, Trump's lead over Biden grows to 7 points. RFK Jr. causes Biden to lose ground among independents, younger voters, and even Democrats. And for the first time since Noble started asking, a majority of Arizona Republicans identify as Trump supporters rather than party supporters. 10% more Republicans are Trump loyalists than party loyalists, which brings me to my guest this week, which is Paul Bentz. Paul is a senior vice president of research and strategy at the political firm Highground Incorporated. I invited Paul and his giant brain here to help me sort through all the polls that we're seeing right now. There's a lot of them out there. There's a ton.
So many, and they all are saying generally the same thing, but it is, quite a bit of time before the election, and things will change, but it does give us sort of a snapshot of where things are right now.
You always give the warning to people, as a pollster. This is a snapshot of now. This is not a prediction of what's going to happen in the fall, right?
Right.
Okay.
The old saying goes, the only poll that matters is the one on election day.
Right,
it's a oft-used, well-worn statement, but it is definitely true.
So let's start with the presidential polling. So a CBS poll we saw earlier this week has Trump up by 5 points in Arizona. Are you more inclined to believe that poll or the Noble poll's 3-point advantage, or is it just kind of a wash because of the margin of error?
Well, as we look at a lot of these polls, we see most of them are within the margin of error. And what that tells us is this is a dead heat right now. We know that President Biden isn't particularly popular in the state of Arizona. And we know that while MAGA candidates didn't fare well in 2022, Trump is the ultimate MAGA candidate. He gets, like you said, that Trump Republican now, that they don't even necessarily identify themselves as a Republican, but rather that they're just a Trump supporter. So it's a different animal altogether.
And this is where it seems, at least in the CBS poll, where Biden takes his hits is the economy, fair or not, and then the border. A majority of Arizona voters told CBS News Biden has been too easy on migrants and that recent immigrants have made life in Arizona worse. But just to make sure we don't label Arizonans as a bunch of bigots, a sizable chunk of Hispanic voters agreed with that statement. And this poll also shows that a majority of Arizonans think that transplants from other U.S. states have made life worse. So it's not the type of human beings that are crossing all of our borders. It's just the sheer number, I guess, right?
They're all strong indicators of the pessimism that we see in the Arizona electorate right now. Only about 40% of voters think that the state is headed in the right direction. Immigration, when we did the survey for the Center for the Future of Arizona, was the number one issue facing the state by quite a significant margin. It used to be that immigration and education kind of went back and forth. Immigration has rose pretty significantly. We did that polling before abortion, so I suspect that abortion would be higher as well. But it's a big issue, particularly among Republicans. And I think one of the reasons that we see the state Senate putting an immigration bill on the ballot is to harness that enthusiasm among Republicans, but also give Trump something very powerful to talk about. Trump's come to the state in 2022 and previously talk about election fraud and the election being stolen. That doesn't work with majorities of the electorate, but he is also a very capable speaker when it comes to immigration. So having an immigration bill on the ballot for voters to vote sort of counteracts, or at least I think their strategy is to try to counteract abortion, but also to get some of that enthusiasm back, to harness some of that negativity that you were just talking about.
It's interesting because while numbers have been reduced recently, at least in Arizona, when it comes to immigration, the head of the Border Patrol Agents Union told me a couple of weeks ago, but yeah, we're still so far above historical standards. under Biden. It's so bad. This is not just a Republican issue by any means. I mean, Senator Mark Kelly's talking about it. Do you think Ruben Gallego's ever going to cross that line and talk about it? Because it's, it is a big enough issue that you have to address it if you're in a statewide election.
I think at some point we'll see a video or a commercial of him touring the border, probably not wearing the cowboy hat like we see for most of the folks.
Right.
But I do suspect we see that there's a lot of angst and animosity about immigration. But what's interesting that we saw in the Center for the Future of Arizona, for example, was that there is a desire to do something about immigration. 77% of voters, including 61% of Republicans, wanted comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. That's a pretty big deal.
Right.
I mean, basically, what's funny is that Gang of Eight proposal from several years ago that never made it anywhere.
Which included the late Senator John McCain.
Exactly. Yeah. And that one really had quite a bit of strength behind it, particularly among the Arizona electorate. And we saw that the Democrats in the United States Senate tried to put forth an immigration reform that didn't go anywhere because Republicans didn't want to solve the issue because they know it's a big issue in this election. And so now we see that the state Republicans are using it to try to harness that energy and maybe offset some of the independents that have gone democratically the last couple of cycles.
Were you surprised to hear how much more RFK Jr. being included in the mix in the presidential race in Arizona hurts Biden more than it hurts Trump? How much more it hurts Biden than Trump?
A little bit. I sort of thought that he actually would probably equally impact both candidates. What that tells me is that the Trump support is solidified. It's limited. It is a group that doesn't grow very much. I don't think a lot of people are going to suddenly say, you know what, I'm going to give that guy Trump a try. Yeah. I think that it's pretty well worn.
Like, I hadn't heard of him before, but I'm thinking now, what the heck?
Who's this Trump guy? Never heard of him. Never seen anything about him. But so his audience is of a certain size, and it's really the larger that the electorate gets, in a higher voter turnout election, that tends to hurt Trump. He's not going to places to change people's minds. He's going to places like Kingman and Buckeye and the Southeast Valley and Prescott, where he has adoring fans and big crowds of people who love him. He really has a base. It's a very solid base, but that's what it is. I mean, that's why we see in these Republican primaries that so many Republicans try to cozy up to Trump because it's the cheat code. It's the way to get a solidified portion of the base that's otherwise you have to kind of cobble together on your own. So his support doesn't grow, though. So I guess I shouldn't have been that surprised that RFK hurts Biden more because Biden's support right now is definitely soft. I think as we get closer to the election, it will maybe solidify more. But, he is the incumbent. There are some economic concerns. There are some age concerns. I think all those make a recipe for doubt in this upcoming election.
Biden and Trump have agreed to two debates, one that takes place before they're actually the official nominees from their party, but they both agreed they did not want RFK Jr. there. And I thought that was kind of funny because at the age of 70, he would be the whippersnapper, in that
also
debate.
A septuagenarian. I think it's funny to note that we have, there's a lack of enthusiasm with this rematch, that we have two 70 plus, 80 plus year olds going head to head. A lot of independent voters, including people like my wife, say, is this the best we can do? And so really, I don't know if we're going to learn a lot about this from the debates or anything else, but I think there's other factors at work. That's why we see this abortion issue being a big one, this immigration issue being a big one, because folks that maybe would have skipped the presidential election or maybe aren't as enthusiastic about it are going to show up to vote for those issues and then probably cast a vote for president as well. You
have experienced at least something similar to what I've experienced with a couple of friends, and that is there's a couple of Trump supporters. I know they voted for Trump the last two elections, but they're all in on RFK Jr. You said you saw somebody change one of their yard signs? Yeah. One of my colleagues, their neighbor was a longtime Kerry Lake fan, had a Kerry Lake sign in their yard, definitely a MAGA individual who recently put a RFK sign in their yard. And I think it's an interesting crossover that I don't think a lot of us expected, but there's a portion of that electorate that has got firmly held beliefs that are going to go with RFK. So I think as we get closer to the election, he might have less of an effect on Biden and more of an effect overall. Speaking of third-party candidates, based on what Mike Noble has in his latest poll, that there are 10% more members of the Republican Party who are Trump loyalists than party loyalists. Should Donald Trump be thinking about starting a third party?
I think that they talked about it at one point as an option there. They make so much money through their third party fundraising and through, I mean, him getting the basically what amounts to an endorsement deal that if you're going to use my name, I get a cut of your fundraising profits. Depending on how this election goes, I suspect that this is where it goes. He becomes a convening force of third party individuals and others into something that he can control and, make more money on.
And maybe there's just as much potential to have some fun with him as there was for Ross Perot. Because see on this chart right here. Ross was interesting cat. So on to the Senate race. Do you think, based on the polling info that you've seen and what I just mentioned, that Sheriff Lamb's chances, I want to read this right because I spent a lot of time coming up with it, that Sheriff Lamb's chances at getting the Republican nomination are any better than a snowball sitting on a Pinal County farm field in July?
I think he has a pretty significant challenge ahead of him. He's well known in Pinal County, incredibly popular in Pinal County, but does not have that same sort of national appeal that Kari Lake does. I mean, she is a celebrity. She was on the news for more than 2 decades, incredibly well known, has, broken through the national news as well. What I think we'll see is probably very similar numbers to the protest vote that we saw, the people that took the time to vote for Nikki Haley in the presidential preference election. He'll get a quarter plus of the vote, but they're solidified behind Kari Lake in the primary. But one of the things that I'm noting is that the gap between the love for Trump and the love for Lake is growing. They used to be attached at the hip, but I think as Trump has sort of pushed her away, asked her not to come to Mar-a-Lago as often, that her sort of aping his rhetoric. We always said she doesn't have to cuddle up to Trump because she is Trump. Chuck Coughlin likes to say she's Trump in a dress.
Right,
I think there's a lot of that, and there's only room for one Trump in Trump world, and that's him. So she is starting to lose a little bit of that favor that I think that he gets that no other MAGA candidate is able to achieve.
It's kind of amazing that the last event that Trump was supposed to be at here in Arizona, he took a pass on at the last minute after Kari Lake had that falling out with Jeff DeWitt and essentially got him removed as the party chairman in Arizona.
I think that was pretty telling. I think that we're seeing Trump take a larger and greater role in controlling the apparatus in the state of Arizona. The Arizona Republican Party used to be run by whoever sort of the largest or most senior Republican was in the state. And they dictated things, and the effort was to not only help the presidential candidate, but also help the down ballot races go into these swing districts, help these legislative races that don't have a lot of money. I don't think we're going to see a lot of that in this election. I think it's going to be the Trump team running the Trump playbook to help benefit the president. I don't see them going into some of these competitive areas, these swing districts, and trying to flip those seats. I think they play it safe and continue to go to the areas where he gets the most adoring fans.
You go with the one, you dance with the one who brung you. Right? That's how it goes. Have you seen, in all the polls that you've looked at, have you seen any growth for Donald Trump in any of the voter blocks? And I'll ask the same question about Kari Lake.
Some of the national polling that I've seen says that Trump has made inroads, and Republicans in general, particularly on this immigration issue, among Hispanic voters and maybe some more independent-leaning voters. The challenge that I see is that in the last cycle in 2022, those independent and unaffiliated voters did not break towards the MAGA candidates. And talking about things like banning early voting, election fraud, criminalization of abortion aren't going to get those candidates or get those voters to come back to those candidates. So they really have to focus on issues like the economy. But they're so negative. They have to articulate what they're for. I think one of the challenges that these candidates have is their whole policy is, I'm not the other guy. I'm not that guy's bad.
Yeah.
But they don't really articulate what they're for. When Republicans are able to articulate what they're for, Governor Ducey was a great example, grow the economy and shrink government, he used to say over and over and over. Those types of things bring some of those undecided, unaffiliated voters, younger voters, their way. That general negativity has a high watermark, has a ceiling that is very difficult to break through.
I'm reminded of a point that I heard in a poli-sci class long ago. You don't pull up to Walmart and they have a sign that says, we don't sell this and we don't sell that. They tell you what they do sell. And that, to your point. How about Kari Lake? Have you seen any growth for her in any particular voting blocks?
No, in fact, we've seen mostly shrinkage in that area. And I think that's what we see the difference between the presidential race and the Senate race, is that in the presidential race, Trump has that base of ardent support and positives that no other MAGA candidate can have. And Biden is getting all the negatives right now of being the leader and of the economy and immigration and other items. Whereas Gallego, as sort of the unknown quantity, gets sort of the benefit of the doubt and his number goes up, whereas Lake doesn't have that Trump magic, so her number goes down. So it really does make sort of sense that the presidential race is basically neck and neck and will be on the nail biter. But right now, the Senate race isn't so much.
Mike Noble said something the other day. He calls him Gallego 2.0. There has been a bit of a transformation in what he talks about. But I also have to say, those ads that he's running, they're great. I mean, they really are. They hit you in the gut. You can't be a patriotic American and go, well, I can't support that guy, the Marine,
Right.
It's really hard, to dislike him at the very least, right?
Well, and it's very difficult because he does have a very progressive voting record. He represents one of the most progressive districts in the state, let alone in the country. So he is generally progressive, but it's going to be really difficult to pin that on him. He's taking the Mark Kelly, Kyrsten Sinema playbook, talking about being in Arizona and talking about his military service. And not only that, but he's targeting issues. One of his first ads talked about water, for example. He's hitting on issues that independents care about. Because he doesn't have a primary, he's not having to keep within sort of the Democratic realm. He's able to talk about broader issues and grow his base. And he's got sort of a head start, whereas Lake, running in a primary against Lamb, hasn't really been able to do that so far.
What do you think Kari Lake needs to do to crawl out of this what seems to be a giant hole that she's sitting in with general election voters? One of the things that Noble poll showed is she doesn't do very well with women, surprisingly. And women are going to play, they're like more than a third are undecided at this point. So they're going to play a huge part in this.
She has a big challenge because, first of all, she needs to rectify her in-person persona, her social media persona, and her video persona. They're all a little different right now. She tried to appeal to these McCain Republicans and go in that realm and sort of talk to them, try to bring them back into the fold, say she just was kidding when she said get out. The problem is that we have receipts that show that that's not what she meant. But then at the same time, she was on social media piping off about election fraud and Trump, saying to these McCain folks, we're going to stop talking about it. And then on social media, she was. So she's got to rectify that. And then when it comes to targeting female voters and talking to them, they care about sort of these fundamental issues, education, policy, safety, and this mama bear persona, this like, I'm a tough mama bear. I don't know if it's breaking through. I think she needs a little bit of a reset here. She needs to get back to reminding people, what it was like when she was in our house talking on the news, get back to more of that persona. She's gotten, I'd say, over the course of the 2022 election, progressively more pointed and angry, and I don't think that is what the electorate was looking for. I think they're looking for someone that they like and someone that they can count on and somebody that's going to bring people together. So she really would have to sort of change a lot of that in order to, I think, move the number pretty significantly.
Isn't that what we always tell candidates? That's what people want?
Right.
Those things you just listed?
Right. Yeah. But, and it used to be that candidates would go to the right or go to the left and then sort of navigate back to the middle for the general election. Right, yeah. And so they'd sort of stay in one lane and then kind of sort of back. We even saw John McCain do this with build the dang fence. But the problem is these days that the candidates go so far to the ideological extremes that it's really difficult to navigate back. And that's where we're seeing Gallego right now. Now, he has a much easier path. He's able to already talk to that general electorate, and she doesn't seem to have followed suit. I don't know who she takes advice from, though. I mean, that ultimately,
that was something
that's a big
I wanted to ask you, because I'm not in the game anymore, right? You've got your ear a little more to the ground. I know that one of the biggest complaints against her, at least among political consulting circles, was she doesn't take advice from anybody. She ran her gubernatorial campaign the way she saw fit. Has that changed?
I don't think she takes advice from anybody locally, not anybody that knows politics or has any sort of historical context. There's been a lot of Johnny-come-latelys in the political realm. They run one campaign. They think they're political experts. They hang a shingle, and suddenly they're all, political consultants with strategy. But that whole generation was brought up with the win a primary and you're safe, from these safe districts. And so they only know how to fight, only know how to attack. They don't know how to bring people together or to cast a vision. We're really lacking a lot of candidates with leadership, that sort of vision to let people know of where they're going to go, that you have faith in what they're doing. That's a big struggle these days.
We talked about the presidential election in Arizona. We talked about the U.S. Senate race. Are there any other interesting statewide or federal races, congressional races, that you think you've been seeing polling information and you're like, wow, this is going to kind of go a little bit haywire, or I was really surprised to see that?
Well, I think Congressional District 1, which is Schweikert's district in the sort of Northeast Valley, is probably one of the most competitive congressional districts in the country. I think all eyes are watching that. And within that district is several of our key swing districts for legislative races as well. So I think we're going to see a lot there. And Democrats really put a lot of their eggs in that basket with redistricting. They basically sacrificed the northern part of Arizona to CD2 and made it a much more Republican district. And we see Crane with that district now. It used to be O'Halloran, had a Democrat there. They really sacrificed that long term, letting that one go red to make sure that this district over time goes blue. Sort of like Congressional District 9, Kirsten Sinema's old district in the previous time was set up to be
primarily Tempe and the areas around that.
Right, and downtown Phoenix.
Yeah.
It was set up to be competitive at the start and go blue over time, which is exactly what it did.
Yeah.
I think they did the exact same thing here in Congressional District 1, but I think it might happen faster, where we may see that flip. The other one I am watching right now is CD6, Juan Ciscomani's district. It is a district that has gone back and forth in the past. It actually was one that over time that we saw, Gabby Giffords was from the same general area, and that one went back and forth. It was competitive over time. This issue of abortion certainly can play a role in that race, and that's something that we're watching pretty closely.
Yeah. Fascinating guy, though, by the way. He's somebody who's calling for border security, who is I believe, the only Mexican immigrant in Congress.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge because, fundamentally Republicans do things like hail the Dobbs ruling and stuff because that's sort of what they want to do to maintain the base. But then I like to say the abortion ruling from the Supreme Court was like the dog catching the car. They didn't know what to do once they caught it. It was easier to chase it. But now once they caught it, having to navigate that as a real issue to deal with is much more challenging.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
There's always that weird moment where I try to lean over the microphone and shake your hand.
So I heard your Ross Perot impression. Do you have a Trump impression?
No. And if I did, I wouldn't use it. That would get me in too much trouble. I neither confirm nor deny that I have that. But speaking of David Schweikert, he's going to be our guest on the next AZ Political Podcast. I hope you'll join us. Thanks again to Paul Bentz from Highground for all this great poll information this week.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.